In this project, we are going to develop an event calendar for an entertainment company using arrays, loops, and conditional statements. Rather than constructing the calendar manually, we want to use JavaScript to automatically generate a web table for calendar month. So we need to develop a web table with links to each event placed in the cell tables. So here's the overview of the project. We want to put events in this web table. So as I mentioned earlier, we are going to use JavaScript rather than HTML to develop this web table. For this web table, we need a caption, which includes the name of the month and year, and we also in the table header we need days of the week from Sunday through Saturday, and then for each cell we have some events already provided in our data table. You can get the files for this project from Cengage website, or if you are my students, I will provide it to you through Canvas. So let's go into the project folder and see what we have. So here we have this web page. We are going to develop event calendar for this company, Lehman Hall Theater. At the bottom of this paragraph, we are going to add a web table. So first, I'm going to open the LHT calendar txt, in which we will add our JavaScript files, and LHT August txt is our web page. So at the bottom of this article, I'm going to add a div element with ID calendar and then ending tag for the calendar for the div element. Inside this div element, we want to use JavaScript to add a web table inside this div element. And of course, we need to link other files into our web page. First, we need to add our CSS files. Here we have LHT calendar. We need to link this CSS file to set the appearance of the web page. LHT underline calendar.css equals LHT calendar.css. Its type is style sheet, and we need to add slash because link is a type of one-sided command. Next step is to link our JavaScript files. Here we have two JavaScript files, the LHT calendar txt that we use to develop our main HTML files, and LHT calendar, LHT event includes the list of events. It has already been filled. So here's the list of calendar in the form of array. We need to link it to our project. So for this step, we don't need this file, but we need to link it to our HTML file. So I'm going to link these two files. Script and then set its source attribute to LHT calendar underline txt.js, exactly this file. And I'm going to set its defer attribute because I want this script to load after the entire web page has been loaded, and the ending tag for the script element. And I'm going to repeat this piece of code for the other JavaScript file, because both these two files are considered external files and we need to link them through the head element. So LHT event.js, again defer, and ending tag for the script. Save. It has to be LHT events. Save. So we are done with this HTML file. Now we can go to the JavaScript file to develop our web page. So the first step, we need to add caption to the table, and this caption must display the name of the month and year. So we know from previous videos that functions like get month return the number of month. So we need to define a function to convert that number into the text string. So to be able to convert that, we need to add an array to our program. So first, I need to define date function to get the current date. So I'm going to define a variable with name this day equals, I'm going to define a new object of type date. Let me add comments to this part of the code. So we want to display current date. Save. And then we need to write the calendar. We need to add web table to the div element. So inside this div element, we're going to define a web table which includes date events. So write calendar within div element. Save. So now I'm going to refer to the div element using this command, document dot, I can find it by its ID. I've already defined its ID as calendar, so I can refer it in this JavaScript file with this command, get element by ID. Calendar, and then we want to modify its inner HTML property. It equals create calendar, which I will define shortly. This function we'll design the web table in JavaScript. So I'm going to use this day, pass this day to that function to be able to show the events of the calendar. So now we have referenced this item calendar, and then now we have to define the create calendar function to be able to define a web table. So we need a function to generate the calendar table. So I'm going to define a function, create calendar. It has one argument. It receives the date, and then based on that date it will display the events of that date and month. So we want to design a web table using this JavaScript file. So I'm going to define a variable, calendar HTML, and inside that I'm going to define HTML codes. I'm going to define table element and then set its ID to calendar table. Calendar underline table. So our table ID is calendar table, and then we need to add table header and other table rows and elements to this table. So first we have this table opening tag defined, and we need to define ending tag for this table, calendar HTML. We're going to add the ending tag to this table, and then semicolon at the end of the command. So now in this function we have defined a table. Inside for this table we need to define a caption. Calendar HTML, we're going to call a new function called calCaption. I will define this function later on, and it will receive this argument, calendar date or cal date. And this function must return the calendar HTML. So save. This is basically the function that designs the table in the JavaScript file, and in this table we call a function calCaption which sets the calendar caption, table caption. So now we need to define a new function, calCaption, let me set its comments, function to write calendar caption. It receives cal date as an argument, open and close curly brackets. So in this function, we need to display the month and year. So we need to define variable for each of these two variables. I'm going to define this month, which equals cal date, and then extract month from that date. So this cal date is of date type. So from this date, we need to extract its month and year to be able to display as our caption. And the next element is going to be the year, cal date, and we can use function get full year. As we want to display the month, the name of the month, we need to convert the number returned by this function. Get month return the number of month. So we need to receive this function, this number, and then convert it into the month name. So for this reason, I will define an array. Month name array that contains months. So here I'm going to define a variable, a type of array, which contains month of the year, January, February. So array stores multiple values of the same type. So this array contains text strings. March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and December. So this array contains 12 elements of type text string. So we need this array to be able to convert this number that will be returned by get month to this text. Now we can convert these variables into each other. So we can use return. I'm going to define caption element to display the month and year, and then add other text string. I have month name, and then use this month. This month is an indexed to this array. So this function month name will display the current month in this format. And then a space, and after a space I'm going to display the year, and then ending tag for the caption. And then end the command with semicolon. So let's go over our code, see if there is any syntax error. So we have defined new date, and then we want to define a web table using create calendar function in the div element, which has calendar ID. This function create calendar receives date, and then based on that date it will create a table. And for the first step we need to add a caption to that table. So we call cal caption, pass cal date parameter. Cal caption receives cal date, and the based of the calendar date it will extract the month and year portion of the date, and then convert the month number into this text. Save, and then go to the web, refresh. So here we have April 2022. So now we have our web table with its caption. In the next step we will have to define the header for the table. The header must contain days of the week starting from Sunday through Saturday. So for this one I'm going to define a new function to add table rows. So for the first step we are going to define table header function to write table header which contains days of the week. So I'm going to name it this function cal weekday row, open and close curly brackets. So first I'm going to define days of the week in an array. Our first variable is going to be day name, an array which contains abbreviation of the days of the week: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the last item is going to be Saturday. Okay, so we have an array with 7 elements, days of the week. And then I'm going to define a new variable, row HTML, which defines the rows of the web table. So I'm going to set its table row, and inside the table row we need to define the table data and other elements. In the next step, we can add these elements manually to the table with each table row, table header, but there is another way with loops. We can use for loops to define and add these elements as table header with just one line of code. So for is a loop that repeats a block of code. So for has three elements. First is the initial value of the index, and then it must repeat its commands. This is the ending condition. Day name, its length. That means this loop must repeat the command for 7 times for each days of the weeks, and then it must increment in each round. I++ will increment the index. So the row HTML equals plus equals. So now we can define our table head for each day of the week. So I'm going to define class to be able to connect it to the style rules already defined in the CSS file. Calendar, weekdays, and then add other strings. With this command we will add the items of this day name. So we can reference that using index I in each round. Each of these items, one of these items is going to be added to the table. And then for the header we need ending tag. Table head. So this 4 will add the days of the week as table header inside the table, and for this table row we need ending tag. Row HTML equals tr, table row. So we have one table row. Within that table row tag we need 7 table head for each day of the week. And then this function must return row HTML. So we have defined the cal weekday row function, which adds days of the week as table header. For Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as table header. So we need to call this function here in our main function. So calendar HTML, I'm going to call cal weekday rows, save, and now go to the HTML page and refresh. Okay, so here we have days of the week, Sunday, Monday through Saturday. So now we have to add other table rows for the days of the month. So I'm going to define a function to write table rows for each day of the month. So I'm going to name it cal days. This cal days function receives calendar date or the current date, so first we have to determine the starting day of the month. So for example, here August starts from Wednesday, so for these days, Sunday through Tuesday, we have to add blank to the table. So we have to determine the first day of the month. The starting day of the month. I'm going to define a new variable, day equals new date. These three elements, cal date, they get full year for the year, and then calendar date, its month portion, get month. Save, and another variable for weekday, equals day dot get day, the starting day of the month. So we need to write blank before the starting day save. So I'm going to define a new variable, HTML code, and then add table row element, tr, and then going to define a for loop, open and close curly brackets, inside the for loop I'm going to define its index, I equals 0, and then it must repeat for as long as the I is less than weekdays, and the last part is to increment the index. So this for will add blank before the starting day of the month. So HTML code plus equals, so I'm going to add blank table data, one blank cell with TD element, save, So now after this part we have to add right cells for each day of the month. Right cell for each day of the month. I'm going to define a new variable, total days of the month. Here we can use a new function to calculate the number of the days in each month. I'm going to define a new function calling month with calDate argument. I will define this days in month function later on. And then we need to highlight the day equals calDate dot getDate and for var I equals 1, I is less than or equal to total days, so it must repeat print all of the cells related to the days of the month. So it will repeat until the last day of the month, total days, and then increment the index. So first we need to set date for that day, and then weekday equals day dot get day. And if weekday equals 0, we can add HTML code. We can add a new table row. If I equals highlight day, we need to run other pieces of code, HTML code, add table data, and then define class name for those data. I'm going to set its class name to calendar dates, and then ID to calendar today, then add index I and day event, which contains the link to the event of the day. The event day event is an array that has been defined in a separate file, LHT events. So we need to link these events to our main file to be able to display them in table TD elements. So here's the list of day events that we need to add to each TD element. Day event I, and then ending tag for TD. If this is not the starting day, the HTML code is going to be TD of class calendar dates plus I plus day event index I, and then ending tag for TD. And finally, if we're going to check the condition if weekday is the last one. So the index starts from 0 to 6 for 7 days of the week. If this is the last day of the week, or index or it equals 6, the HTML code must end the table row. So we add ending tag for the table row. So these are the tasks that should be done for the first day of the week. We receive if the highlight day. We add day event for each day of the week. Otherwise, and when it reaches the last day of the week, we close the table row for each row. And finally, this function must return the HTML code. Okay. So here we used a function days in the month. So we need to determine how many days are in the month. So I'm going to define a new function, days in month. It receives cal date. So I'm going to define variable for the days in each month. I'm going to define a new variable, day count, the number of days in each month. In January we have 31 days, 29, 28 days. In February, 31 in March, 30 days in April, 31 in May, 31, 30, 31 days, 30 days, 31, 30 days, and then 31 days in December. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here's the day count for each month of the year. We need to extract the 4-digit year and month value. So I'm going to define a new variable this year. We need to extract the month and year portions from that date. I'm going to use cal date and then use get full year. Var variable this month. So in this function we just need the number of month. So I'm going to use cal date and then get month. So for leap years we have 29 days in February. Calculate the number of days in February for leap years. So I'm going to check this condition with if this year, so every 4 years we have leap year. If the mode 4 is equal to 0, then we have leap year. If so the day count, if this is leap year, the day count for February, day count 1, which refers to the second element because index starts with 0. So day count 1 refers to the second month of the year, which is February. So for the leap year, the number of days is 29. And this function must return day count for the current month. Save. Save, go to the HTML file, save. So now I'm going to go to the folder and then run the HTML file. So here's the list of events for this month, which is April 2022. So here is how we define a web table using JavaScript file. It gives us more flexibility to work with different items, elements, and in this project we went over for loop, arrays, and we use various items in JavaScript, and then we linked our web table to other JavaScript file for these elements of the month. So for further information, you can contact me at stabar@bsu.edu, and if you need these files, you can go on Cengage website, or if you are my students, I will upload these files to you.